Your host Jarrad VK3BL here, and the first thing I want to say is thank you to everyone who's watched my videos and subscribed to my channels. It showed me that there's quite a bit of appetite in the ham radio hobby for equipment reviews and that sort of thing. So hopefully it means I can keep producing them in the future, and I do want to cover some other radios as well, so stay tuned. What we're doing today is basically having a look at the menu overview of the IC-7610. Now, anyone who has an IC-7300 or an IC-7100 even will be familiar with the style of menu on these Icoms. The first thing I'll point out is you've got a menu 1 on the touchscreen and a menu button. Now, the menu 1 and all those buttons down the bottom on the touchscreen are all to do with just the spectrum scope. So there's no radio settings there. What you actually want to do is press the menu button. So we press that and we're taken to, I guess, the home menu. Icom also have a quick menu, which isn't particularly useful at this stage. There's a few little things there, but this is the main menu you use for things like turning digi-select on and off, turning tracking on and off. You have to hold it to turn tracking on. You can't just tap it. See? Can't tap it. Have to hold it. Not sure why that is, but that's the case. But the thing that's interesting to me today is to look at the settings. So if we go into settings, the first one you'll see here is tone control. Now if we tap on tone control, we've got two options, RX and TX. RX, we'll go into that first, and that covers all the different modes as well. So we'll just go into SSB, and you'll see there's bass level, bass EQ, treble EQ. There's also this top one, RX, high pass and low pass. So if we go into that, with high pass, you can, and this is in the AF stage, I will emphasize, this isn't IF. But that's how you want it. It's better that way. So if we go here, we can see the first high pass filter starts at 100 Hertz. You've got 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. Well, it seems it goes all the way pretty much. So up to 2000 is your maximum. So we'll go back down, turn that off. I don't want that on. You can accomplish similar things with external speakers with filters built into them. So this is more for people who don't have a nice external speaker. Your second one, which is your low pass, starts at 2.4 and goes down to, let's find out, all the way down to 500. Not really sure why you'd want to use anything other than, I guess, 2.4 really, and maybe up to 300 or 500. You know, that's about as far as I'd go. Honestly, it's not too much of a useful feature. The one thing it does have is a less sharp roll-off than the IF filters. So that's, you know, if you want to tailor your audio just a little bit without, you know, having a really steep brick wall style filter, this is where you want to do it. I do it with an external speaker, so we'll get out of that. Bass menu, you know, similar sort of thing, up and down. Very useful, you know, especially if you've got a small teeny external speaker or something, you can adjust these things. And even though it's not a 3-band EQ, I still find it very useful. If you read up on communication studies, basically the frequencies in the mid, in what we'd call a mid, I guess, from 500 to about 1 kilohertz, there's very little intelligibility in them, and that's why a 3-band EQ really isn't necessary. You basically want to be able to roll off the bass and increase the treble if you're working with a weak signal. So you can do that here. More advanced stations, probably the people who own a 7610, will probably have external speakers or other external sound processing to do this for them. So it's not really a very useful thing, but if it is there, maybe for a de-expedition or whatnot, I'd say it's just a standard part of the Icom menus. So it's pretty much the same for all of these, AM, FM, CW. CW just has the high pass and the low pass. Once again, not really sure why you'd do it there when you could do it with IF much quicker without delving into the menu. You're certainly not going to go into this menu when you're trying to work a contest, for example. So it's not a hugely useful feature. RTTY, RIDI, has the same, just the high and the low pass on audio, and same with PSK. These options might be useful if you're feeding an external decoder or a computer sound card directly or something. I'm not sure. If you go into TX, this is where this particular menu item gets useful. You can set your SSB settings. Now, generally speaking, I'll go and reset them to factory. They look like this. So that's pretty much, I think, what they look like from well, I'll go back, terrible. So that's what it looks like from factory. Bass 0, TX treble 0, TX wide is 100 to 2900, TX mid is 300 to 2700, and TX narrow is 500 to 2500. I like to go and put them up to 300 to 2900 for mid, and even say 500 to 2700 for narrow. A lot of intelligibility is around 2 kilohertz and above, so I like to increase my bandwidth a little bit where the intelligibility is. I don't like to, TX wide is really nice, 100 to 2900, 2.8, when you've got good signal conditions, when you're rag chewing, but do be aware these Icom radios, they do tend to get a little wide, I guess, when you run them at 100 to 2900. So, you know, just be aware, just be a considerate band person. If you're in a contest, don't use wide. There's no benefit to it, don't use it. Lovely for a rag tube, but yeah. I tend to stick with TX with mid, with my extra high end, and I find that works quite well. I get good audio reports from that. So, and narrow, of course, I just use for de-expeditions. 2.2 is, you know, it's going to sound really tinny with a 500 hertz high pass, but you know, it'll get the job done basically. And we'll put our treble back up. I use a Heil PR40, but generally speaking, with any microphone, you cannot go wrong with +2 and 0 as your bass. Some microphones that are very, very bass heavy, you want to roll it off a little. I could probably roll it off 1 with the PR40, but I like to rag chew a bit, so I leave it at 0. Same for AM, more or less. You know, just TX bass and TX treble. You don't get all the different settings. You've just got one setting there, so it looks like you can't adjust the AM bandwidth, but that's all right. FM, same thing, just TX bass and TX treble. The bandwidth obviously is set by the mode, not anything else. So we'll go out of that. We'll go back to the main menu. On your right here, you'll see you've got SD card and USB and flash drive and others. They sort of stay there. We'll look at them later because really it's just a menu wrapping around. So if we go into function, there's a lot of stuff in here. I better, I'll use my other hand. Better go right back to the start. You've got your beep level limit. I'm assuming what that does is if you've got the volume cranked right up, it won't beep too loud, even if you've set it at 100%. You've got confirmation beep, band edge beep. You've got several different settings there. Beep sound, so the frequency of the beep sound sub, so that's their main and sub receiver beeps. So if you want 2 different beeps for your different receivers, that's a good setting. We might try that out actually. So I'll go with I'll leave that one at 1000 and I'll go with a lower one. I'll go with, let's say, 800 for my main receiver. So we'll see what that sounds like too. Your next one is your RF squelch control. Anyone familiar with an Icom knows that at 12 o'clock you've got full RF gain and no squelch. So with that setting, or you can change it to just be pure squelch. I reckon RF plus squelch is a fantastic setting, so I've never ever changed that. TX delay, you can set it for both HF and 50. Useful if you've got an amplifier that takes a while to switch. You know, so you're not hot switching. You can go up to 30 milliseconds delay. Beyond that, you're going to need, you know, some kind of sequencer if you have such an amp. I've never had an amp, you know, that needed this to be used. Anything modern that you can buy today, even an 811, won't need to use that. That said, sometimes I do like to have it at 10 milliseconds just as a little extra precaution, so we'll leave that there. Timeout timer for Siv. I don't know what that does, to be honest, but some of my viewers will. So you've got 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and 30 minutes. I'm going to leave it where it is. Quick dual watch. Now, my understanding of that is that when you press the dual watch button and hold it, that allows you to quickly set the sub band to the same frequency as your current band. Split. You've got quick split. Similar function to how the quick dual watch works. The ability to display a keypad on quick split. You've got FM offsets for when you're trying to work a repeater, and split lock. So there's quite a few things there. Tuner, push to talk start. That means that it'll send the tune command when you press push to talk. But you know, that's only really useful if you're using something like, well, if you're using the internal tuner with maybe your beams or something without an amplifier. Well, look, I'll just qualify and say it's only useful if you don't have an amplifier, more or less. So it'll be useful if you've got an antenna that the internal tuner can handle, or it'll be useful if you're using something like the AH4. Now let's go down. Transverter function auto. No idea what that does, to be honest. There's not a whole lot of documentation about the transverter feature yet, not in English. And given it's a HF rig, whether you're really going to use it for transverter use, I don't know. If someone can make a good reason, or if someone can mount a good argument for why you'd use this rig to drive a transverter, please do leave it in a comment, because most of the people who use transverters have told me that basically you wouldn't use a HF rig as your exciter or and your intermediate frequencies. The intermediate frequency is just no good. So let me know if you know more about that sort of thing. You've got your RTDY settings. Leave them standard, don't need to touch them. RTDY keying, once again, leave that standard. And PSK tone frequency, not really sure what you do with that. I haven't used PSK on this radio yet. Conditions haven't been fantastic, and I've sort of noticed with the popularity of the new JT mode and JT modes in general, there hasn't been a lot of PSK activity lately, so haven't had a chance to give that a go yet. I should do a scared. Next screen, speech. That's when you press the little talkie button. We'll do that now. Let's see what it says. Probably should turn the volume up. So as you can hear, the speech actually comes over the top of your received audio. So I actually didn't. I found I couldn't hear that too well. Not that I ever use the speech function, but if I'm going to use it, why not set it to something I'm going to use it with? So let's try that. F6.7.105 megahertz LSD. As I said, it would be useful for those who maybe are visually impaired and that sort of thing, but certainly at 50, it can be quite hard to hear. Even at 75, it can be hard to hear. Hopefully that audio came across with the camera all right. So we'll go out of that. Speech lock switch, you can actually set what that switch there does. You know, what does one press do speech, or does one press do lock? So it's basically press and hold. I'm going to change that because I don't use speech much, but I do have young kids who like to play knobby, which actually means turn all the knobs on my radio. So that can be quite annoying when I'm using digital modes. So I'm going to set that to lock because I want to be able to just touch that and lock it. Now, then you've got the next option is lock function, and that's what it locks. At the moment, it's set to just lock the main dial. Very useful if you're working digital modes and you might accidentally knock the dial. But in my case of protecting the radio from young kids, I'm actually going to want to do the panel. And that locks out all the panel buttons, not just, I think there's a few exceptions, but not just the main VFO knob. So yeah, young kids, put it on panel. If it's just you in the shack, just leave it on main dial, because that's the only thing you're going to knock, really. Memo pad quantity. Haven't used this feature, but you can change it from 5 and 10, so there you go. Main dial auto tune step. It's on high, you can do it to low or off. That's basically whether it accelerates, it changes how far it moves per notch, I guess, or per revolution, depending on the speed you turn the dial. I leave it at high. High I think is fantastic, but you can put it down to low or off if you want it to be linear rather than, I guess it's logarithmic to some degree. Now this one here, main dial select USB dial sub only. What that does is basically, if you've got one of these little guys, hopefully that comes up all right in the camera, just having a look now. If you've got one of these RC28 rotary encoders, that sets whether or not you can just use it to adjust the sub receiver frequency, or whether you can use these buttons to select either the main or sub and then adjust them using the knobs. So depending on your usage, you'll want to have it on different settings. I like it on main sub, generally speaking, but if you're doing split operations, dual watch, working de-expeditions, being a de-expedition, or perhaps maybe being a contester, you'll want to keep it on main only. You won't want to change that. I think I'll get that right, main dial select. Oh yeah, USB dial, yeah. So it's a little bit, I got confused there because it says main dial select and it's got brackets USB dial. So it's a little bit confusing, but yeah, that's what it means. How is your very expensive, you know, knob going to, or rotor encoder, going to function? On the next screen, you've got main sub tracking, and you can turn, there's a switch on. Not sure what that does. I'm going to have to explore that one. Because I'd always turn tracking on and off using the quick menu. So yeah, I'm going to have a read about that. Mic, up down speed. Once again, not really sure what that one does, but it's there. Quick RIT and TX clear. I'm not sure why they've put it like that, because there is actually a clear button. So once again, a bit of further reading needed. As I said, I don't profess to have mastered this radio yet, but I will show you what's in the menu. Notch switch, auto manual. So that's basically what, you know, when you press the notch filter button, how that will work. And you can set it for both AM or SSB. You can have different preferences about how your notch filter is going to work. Once again, filter screen, sub-select. Haven't felt the need to change that either, but obviously you can. And let's have a look at the next one. You've got CW SSB synchronous tuning. That's a new feature of this rig, and I turned it on. And I believe, I could be incorrect, but I believe it sort of helps automatically lock onto the signal. You can change the CW normal side. You can change the keyboard type, you can change the keyboard layout. I don't know why it says layout. Okay, so it's, you know, different countries have slightly different keys in different places on your standard keyboard, so that's what that lets you change. I went and turned this on. I like this feature. You can do a screen capture by pressing the power button. Awesome, love that. Don't know why it's not on by default. Turn that one on. You can also, if you're using an external keyboard, you can set print screen to do a screen capture. Once again, great feature. Don't know why it's not on. And you can also set where that gets stored. So I use an SD card. I don't want to take up a USB port for a flash drive. I want to use it for things like my rotary encoder and a keyboard. So why wouldn't I just use the SD card? They're not expensive, so that's what I'm using. I guess you might want to use a USB key if you don't have a laptop with an SD card slot or a little converter to plug your SD card into. I guess that's probably why you might choose USB, but SD cards, they're cheap, they're easy, they fit right in the front here, go for it. Screen capture type, let's have a look. You've got PNG and BMP. BMP stands for bitmap. PNG, can't remember what that one stands for, but you want to use PNG. Much smaller files, and it's an open standard like bitmap, so Unlike JPEGs, which technically you need a license for, PNG you don't. Beautiful quality, no reason why you'd change that I can think of. So I leave mine on PNG. Calibration marker, have to read up on what that does, left it off. And ref adjust. Don't touch ref adjust. There's no need to touch ref adjust. Don't touch it. It was set in the factory for your radio. It shouldn't even be in this menu item. If you are going to touch it, at least do Icom the courtesy of writing down what their setting was. What it's for is if you're in somewhere like the States where you can easily hear Whiskey Whiskey Victor, I think it is, the time station, you can use that to adjust your frequency slightly. But you don't need to. Leave it alone. Don't touch it. Anyway, let's get out of this menu. So let's go to the connectors menu. And once again, we're going to have a lot of things here. So the first one is phones. So you can change your phone level, and that's the phone port, your headphones. And you can do a left and right mix, or you can have it off. So I haven't tried it, and that's something I want to do a video on, is trying the headphones and the left and right, and whether the sub receiver goes into one ear and whether the main receiver goes into the other. I can't imagine it wouldn't, but I would assume what this feature does is instead of having, you know, your sub in your left ear and your main in your right ear, you can turn this on and have them both in both ears and then mix them using the knobs there. So I'll tell you in a follow-up video whether I like that off or on. We'll get out of the phones. ACCAFIF Output. Self-explanatory. Do you want your accessory plug, there's a pin on the accessory, to put out a baseband frequency or a 12 kilohertz IF frequency? Once again, sorry. Okay, so there's actually quite a lot in that menu. I wasn't expecting that, if I'm being frank. So let's have a look. We'll go into there. You've got AF SQL output select. You've got what the main menu is actually titled with, which is whether or not you're going to output AF or IF. You've got a whole bunch of other stuff. You know, if you've got split on, whether you're sending the sub receiver or the main receiver. You've got the output level. You've got whether squelch has any effect, and you've got whether the beep's there. So, and you can also set your IF output level. So basically the ACC connect pin is going to be used when you're connecting up a computer or some other bit of equipment. So it is nice to see there's a bunch of features in there to turn off stuff like beeps. You know, if you're doing digital decoding, you don't want it to beep all the time when you're changing menu options. So there's quite a bit in that. I wasn't expecting that, to be frank. USB AF/IF output. Once again, I expected to see the same options here, and you don't need to touch these things. I haven't ever felt the need to output IF rather than AF. If someone has a compelling reason why you might want to, let me know. But generally speaking, they're all perfectly set up for how most people are going to use the radio, even with digital modes and that sort of thing. You've got a further menu, which is your LAN AF/IF output, and this one's actually different. It only gives you the output select and whether or not you've got squelch. Default is on, so that's a good thing, because when you're using the radio remotely, you want to be able to set the squelch level with the software, and if you have that off, even setting the squelch level on in the software, it won't take any effect. So once again, they're all perfectly set up from the factory. Leave them alone unless you know why you'd want to change them. Otherwise you might confuse yourself. I get confused. I get confused making videos, so I leave them alone. Mod input. So this lets you set your input levels for your various input connectors. Once again, your accessory plug mod level, your USB mod level, your LAN mod level. When you've got data off, so when you're not using a data mode, where you're going to take your modulation from. The default is mic and accessory. I actually like to have mine as just mic. It probably doesn't make any difference because I've got nothing plugged in, but I don't like the idea of there being a pin that's you know, connected to my modulator that I'm not using that essentially, could have a signal on it. Now, it's not going to, there's nothing connected to it, but if you were to have, say, a long pigtail or something to a device plugged into accessory, the accessory port, and it did have all pins wired, you might want, you might be picking up some RF there. So I don't know why it's not set to mic by default, but generally speaking, set it to mic. You've got 3 data modes with this radio. Data mode 1, data mode 2, data mode 3, and you can set which modulation input you want for those modes. Mod 1, generally speaking, USB, WSJTX, for example. I don't think the hamlib, which is the radio communication library it uses, don't think it's got the facilities yet to make use of the 3 different ones. So it's going to default to data 1. So have your data 1 set to USB if you're using it for digital notes. Data 2 and data 3, that's your preference. Once again, I just left them alone. Excuse me. Next option is USB send keying. And you can change how, this is, I guess, for legacy software that doesn't use, a library, doesn't use Siv. And you can change it basically so it emulates an old serial connector. As you can see there, you can change it for DDR, DDS, all those sort of things. Now, even though it's labeled USB 1, you actually get 2 virtual serial ports from this radio. So that's what the A and B stand for. The 1 stands for the fact it's the USB on the back of the radio rather than the USB ports on the front. Very confusing. Luckily, we don't actually need to use it because we don't really use serial ports anymore for anything other than Siv. So we'll get out of that. Go on to the next menu. External keypad. You can turn it on for your different operating modes. I don't have one. There's a nice diagram on how to build one in the Icom menu. I don't have one, so I've really got no need to go and play with these things. I might build one later and play with it. Keyboard mouse. You can set your settings there. These are some good settings. Basically, if you turn that on, your function keys 1 to 8 will send your programmed memories. So once again, don't know why that's turned off by default. I'm going to turn that on. I haven't used keyboard much. I will use keyboard in an upcoming video, and I definitely want those on. Keyboard type, English, Japanese, UK. Yeah, might be useful, not sure. As I said, different countries, different layouts. Keyboard repeat delay, that's when you hold down a key, how long before it sends the character again. That's the repeat rate, which is 10.9 characters per second. It would seem in conflict with the repeat delay. Oh, sorry. So the repeat delay is how long you hold it down before it starts sending the character over and over again. And the repeat rate is how quickly it sends the character over and over again once the threshold of 250 milliseconds has been reached. These are just personal preferences. I'm going to leave it alone. Don't know how they decided at 10.9 characters per second. Seems a bit odd, but maybe that's the standard or something. Mouse pointer speed mid, fine. Mouse pointer acceleration on. So that's just like your main dial. If you move your mouse faster, it's going to cover more ground. Most computers have it set like that by standard, so that's a good setting. We'll leave them alone. USB dial select. Main sub or sub only. I actually think that's a duplication of the other menu options, so I'll have to clarify that. It might not be, but once again, I'll give the spiel just in case people missed it. Sub only, that's what you want to use if you're operating split and that sort of thing with one of these guys, because then this will adjust your sub receiver and your main dial will adjust your main receiver, and there'll be no crossover. If you've got it set to main sub, you can use function 1 and function 2 to swap between your receivers. So generally speaking, main sub is good for rag chewing and experimentation, where you want to easily be able to change your receiver. Sub only is fantastic for contexting, being a DX station or a DX expedition, and chasing the expeditions. So I'm a little upset that that's not in the quick menu, because that is something you do want to change depending on how you're using the radio. I generally like to experiment a lot, so I've found main sub to be my favorite. As for the tuning speed and leave it on high. I've found that perfect, just like the main dial. And USB dial transmit switch, this lets you select whether it's push and then you're transmitting, push again to stop, or whether you have to hold it down to transmit. I love push to toggle. I think it's fantastic, so I leave it like that. Siv. Wow, there's a whole lot of options in the Siv menu, and these will depend on how your station, or what accessories you've got in your station, what digital modes you're using, that sort of thing. Siv baud rate auto, we found that fine. My Siv address is 5CH, and that's because that's what a Tokyo high power amplifier needs. Siv transceive is good. That basically allows your USB in your computer to still talk to your accessories. And basically these other settings are for how your USB Siv versus your Siv port, the little phono port, the 1/8 inch, works. These are my settings that I had it set up to, so that I could use WSJTX. Now there was a bit of playing around. There's not official support for this radio yet, so that's why I've got it set the way I do. Anyway, I might cover that in another video. We'll go back. External meter. This is awesome. As you can see here, it's a little hard to see, but I've got this little external meter. It's just a little bit of cheap junk, but I put it in there to test it. I love the fact that you can set the drive levels. Basically, you use these to calibrate your meter's operation, and the two top options select what the meter does. You can have auto, or you can have it fixed. Mine's fixed to power output at the moment, because that's what I've calibrated it to. I would love to see a nice aftermarket meter, so hopefully that's forthcoming. Or even even Icom making their own accessory meter. That would be really nice. Decode baud rate. Not actually sure what that one does, to be honest. So once again, leave it alone. Send relay type, MOSFET or read. That'll basically depend on what type of amplifier you're using. And generally speaking, with all modern amplifiers, MOSFET's fine. Read, I think, will work better with amps that have a tendency to, I guess, they have old relays that can have a voltage spike when they switch. So I've left mine on MOSFET. Once again, I make no guarantees that read will make this compatible with any specific amplifier, but you do have the option there. Read up on it if you have a really old amplifier, like I'm talking an old Heathkit or something. Any of the Meritron line, anything you can buy today, MOSFET is perfect. 1 second. ACC band voltage output. That basically means on your accessory port, you'll change. There's a pin, and the voltage will change depending on what band you're on. This one you can have it set so it sends the main band's voltage, the sub band's voltage, or whichever band's TXing its voltage. Leave it on that. Microphone input bias. This one's kind of handy. If you're running a dynamic microphone that doesn't require input bias, turn it off. Now, if you're using a Heil cable, it will have the bypass capacitor built in, so you don't have to, but there's no harm in having it off, I think. Why have something on if you're not going to use it? If you want to use a hand mic, it does need to be on. Any electret microphone will need that on. I use dynamic, so I've got it off. Reference in, no idea. I suspect that's to do with, on the back there is a, it's a, I think it's 10 megahertz reference. 10 megahertz reference signal. I could have that wrong. It's 10 something. Could be gigahertz. Pretty sure it's megahertz. That's if you want an external clock to help make your radio a little bit more accurate. I have no idea why anyone would need that on a HF radio in this day and age. The built-in oscillator is more than accurate enough, even for the fastest of digital modes like FT8. I don't know why they put that there. I suspect it's if you're going to use this rig to drive a transverter, then you might want to use it. You know, if you're doing really weak signal modes and trying to bounce off the moon and that sort of thing, maybe you'd want to use it. I can't see someone using this radio to bounce signals off a moon, but you know, Icom's let you do it. It's got everything you need. So that takes us back out of connectors, I think. Yes, it does. Cool. All right, network. Bunch of settings here so that you can access your radio remotely. I use DHCP. It automatically got a LAN address from my router, so I didn't have to fill any of these things in. Most people will want to leave it like that. It's just easier. I won't go into networking. Please excuse the birds if you can hear them, but just leave it alone. Network name, let's have a look here. Okay, I think I'll give my radio a network name. Let's make it VK3 Bravo Lima. Enter. So that's what if I was to look at my router and say who's connected to my network, that would come up. I might change it actually, VK3BL, and can I do a dash? I can. Okay, and we'll call it IC-7610. Network names can be quite long. There's no worries with that. You can't have spaces, but just use a hyphen or an underscore. A hyphen. Network control, valid after reset. So this is basically if you want to enable the LAN port for remote control, you have to turn that on and then reboot the radio. I've already done that. Power off setting. What does power off do in your remote software? Does it shut it down or does it put it in standby shutdown? I can't remember if it was shut down by default. I've set it to standby shutdown because I don't want my radio to turn off when I use my remote software. It can turn it back on, like don't worry about that. If you remote back in, it will turn the radio on. I like to have my radio on because I use it for digital modes remotely too, not just voice. All this sort of stuff, all this remote access is really if you're going to do phone. If you're going to do digital modes, you're probably going to remote into a remote computer and run the digital modes on the computer that's connected to the radio. That's going to work better because you're not going to get audio loss, you know, if network conditions fluctuate, which they do. Here you set your ports. Once again, don't touch them because the software is expecting them to be there. Unless you have a reason and you know a lot about networking, leave it alone. You've got a few settings here. These are important. The first one basically is what type of internet connection you have. You've got fiber to the home or you've got ADSL CATV. In Australia, with our national broadband network, in almost all cases, you're going to want to have it as FTTH, even if you don't have fiber to the home. Basically it's saying, do you have high speed, low latency internet, or do you have lower speed, higher latency internet? With the way Australian internet's been built with the NBN, this is the one to go for. It's generally low latency. And I say that, I'm not supporting NBN, but I say that as someone who works in the ISP industry. That's the one to go for in Australia. In America, no idea. In the UK, no idea either. Network users, go and set these up. Otherwise, anyone might be able to log into your radio. You set your username, your password, and whether you're an administrator. And it's kind of cool you can have two users. I haven't set up a second user. That doesn't mean it's open, but I haven't set one up. But if I had a friend, for instance, that I wanted to let use the radio, but I didn't want him to have preference over me, I would go and set him up an account there. So you might have, you know, club and then a password that changes every month or something. I don't know. Network radio name. Could have sworn I set that. But I believe what they're getting at here is what's the radio going to come up as in the software. So it defaults to IC-7610. I've only got one, so I'm going to leave it like that. Let's get out of that. Display. Go back to the start. LCD backlight, 50%. Perfect for me. LCD brightness. I can't remember if I put that up or not, but I like it. Display type, A or B. Let's have a look what B looks like. Oh, makes no difference to the menu. Fancy that. It's a little annoying. We'll go back to B. We'll exit the menu. Okay, so it's basically changed the background, so instead of being black, it's got that blue there. Let's put it back to normal. And you can see the radio is black again. Personal preference. I like it the way it is. Display font. Basic or round? Struggling to tell a difference here. I think from memory on the IC-7610 it only makes a difference, once again, on your main screen. You can see everything's slightly rounder now here. All of these fonts stay the same. So it's really just, I guess, for all intents and purposes, what your frequency readout looks like. Kind of a silly setting. Don't even know why they bothered, to be honest. I mean, let's have a look. There you go, it's a little bit sharper. Who cares? It's a radio. It's not a printer. Meter response. I've left mine on mid. I like it on mid. Someone might not. I'll play around with it one day when I'm bored. Once again, left it alone. Meter type, edgewise or bar. By edgewise, I actually don't know what they're talking about, so let's have a look. Oh, okay. It's one of those old style meters. If you, I guess it's just a step up from a bar graph meter. Kind of like it. What's it look like expanded? Okay, so when it's expanded or when you're using a dual screen, that's probably a better option than a bar graph. So that is a useful thing to have there. That said, I do like my standard meter. I reckon they're really nice. When you go to dual, unfortunately, it then does default to the bar. What I would like is to say when I've got it full screen or whatever, then, oh sorry, when I've got full screen or whatever, then to go to edgewise. That'd be cool. Let's see if it does that. Set, display, meter response standard, edgewise mid, meter type, normal screen standard, meter type expand screen. Ah, edgewise. That's worth knowing. So now when we exit out and we add a subreceiver, we don't have to put up with a bar graph. Fantastic, I love it. You can actually see the ballistics of the meter element now rather than just some bars. So I'm going to try it like that. I'll give you my opinion in a later video. Anyway, let's go back to our meter, which our menu overview. Learned something new, fantastic. Meter peak hold on your bar. Do you want to do a peak hold or not? Pretty self-explanatory. Memory name. No idea. No idea what that's for. Someone might be able to tell me in the comments. APF width pop-up on. Okay. Once again, haven't needed to use it. Screensaver, 60 minutes. I've actually found that's a bit much for me, so I put it up that high for videos, but I must admit I've been walking past the shack saying, why is the radio still awake? So I'll set it to 30 minutes. External display off. Not really sure why they bother to have that there. It's not going to make a difference if it's on. It's a digital connector. If something's not plugged into it, it's not putting anything out. So leave it on. External display resolution. This by far is the biggest disappointment with this radio. Now it was in the manual, so we shouldn't have been disappointed, but none of us really thought about it. What this is telling you is that even if you have a 50-inch plasma, it's going to be grainy on the screen. Both of these resolutions, this one 800 by 480, which is the native resolution of the built-in display, is a 16:9 ratio. This one 800 by 600 is a 4:3 ratio. So really all they're asking you is, do you have a widescreen monitor or a standard, or standard cathode ray tube CRT style 4:3 monitor? That's all they're asking. They're not giving you the choice of making it less grainy or not. They're just saying, do you have a 16:9 or a 4:3? If I were Icom, I would have put 16:9 or 4:3 there, and then people wouldn't have worried about the fact that these are terrible resolutions. It's a disgrace, to be honest. They have a connector on the back which can support, for instance, 2560 by 1080, and they're not using it. They might as well just had composite out. This is this is the type of resolution that the Icom 7000 could put out. So really disappointing. Excuse the little dogs, they're annoying. Opening message, this one, that just turns it on or off. And then my call is actually the opening message. So I'll put VK3BL in there. Power on check is on. Don't know why you'd turn it off, to be honest. Display language is English. That's probably a good thing because that's the only language I can read. Time set. You've got your date time here, and whether you go and get time from the internet to make it more accurate. That's pretty cool. I haven't set all of this up. So I've actually got to do a bit more reading in that, because you've then got the UTC offset and you've got another clock and another offset. So there's a whole lot of time-related stuff in here, which is pretty cool. It is nice to see, if you're a de-expedition and you rely on the radio's clock, there is a lot of functionality here. Then you've got your second lots of the menu, your SD card. You can load your settings, save your settings. I'm going to save my settings, new file, why not? And the settings of today, let's save them. Now the nice thing about that is, and this is something Icom touted, by loading and saving the settings, how you've got the radio configured, if you walk into a contest station, a multi-multi, you can bring your SD card, plug it into the front, and have the radio set up just like your radio at home. So that's really cool. Very, very good job there, Icom. SD card info, that just shows you how much free space you've got, how big it is, and how many hours of recording you can get. So I've got a 16 gig card in there, and that'll let me record for 67 hours. Pretty impressive. Screen capture view. This is where you can go and view some of those screen captures you've taken. There's one for example. This is a screen capture I took of a friend's signal. Now the nice thing about this is I can then go and to some degree measure his opposite sideband, or probably in this case more his IMD products. And you can see here you're almost touching that line, and you're just going over that line. So it's about 3 bars. The division is 10 decibels per bar, so he's about 30 down. Now given he's running an FT817, that's fantastic. Now I'm a little confused, because how do I get out of this? I'm going to hit exit. No? Yep, okay, there we go. That's how we get out. So we'll go out of that one. Firmware update. There's no firmwares, no new firmware out yet, so no need to, but the firmware update is very, very easy. The scariest thing is this yellow screen. I've updated the firmware on my 7300 many times, not an issue at all. It is so much easier than updating a Yaesu radio that Yaesu really need to be ashamed. I updated an FTM100, and you need to do 3 separate updates, 3 separate files, one for the DSP, one for the main unit, and one for the front panel. And to do that, you need to remove a rubber grommet and flick a tiny little switch. It's crazy. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with this radio. That's just shame on, well done Icom, very easy to update firmware. Shame on you, Yaesu. You can format your card. I recommend that. If you go and buy a new card, chuck it in, hit format. It's going to be formatted to the radio's preferred format. Anyone who knows much about computers knows there's a heck of a lot of different formats for disks and memory cards. So if we're going to use one on the radio, use the radio to format it. That way the radio is going to be happy with it, and so is another radio. So that's what I did. It still works perfectly in a computer. It just means the radio set it up the way it likes. Screen 2, unmount. That'll be familiar to people who use Linux and Unix operating systems. What that means is basically eject. It's the same as eject in Windows. It disconnects from the USB card, which means you can pop it out quite safely without any risk of corrupting data. You could turn the radio off also, or you could just pop it out like everyone else does. There's not really anything too sensitive on that card. A couple of screenshots, maybe some audio, maybe a couple of settings files. Probably doesn't need to be used, but was put there for sticklers. USB flash drive, all the same here. You can do the same that you could do with a SD card with a USB stick. Good to have that there. As I said, some people might prefer USB, but bear in mind you've only got 2 USB ports. So if you're going to use a keyboard and a nice rotary encoder, then, better get that in the screen, then you're not going to have a spare port for your USB, so use an SD. But it's nice to have it there. Others, information, version. That tells you your firmware versions of your main CPU, your sub CPU, your front CPU, which will be your front panel control, and your FPGA. These are the things I was talking about with the ASUS that you have to go and program manually. Luckily, the Icom firmware update does it all in one go. It's perfect. Love it. Let's get out of that. Touchscreen calibration. Oh, damn, now I have to do it. All right, let's try this. Boom. Boom. And boom. From the factory, it was perfect. Don't press that option. You don't want to calibrate it. It's perfect as it is. If you need to calibrate it, you will know. Reset. I'm too scared to press that now. I'm pretty sure it does ask you, are you sure? But after that touchscreen thing, which I didn't want to do, I'm scared to press it. But we can all imagine what that does. That resets the radio to factory. Emergency. Is that going to call an ambulance? No, it isn't. What that lets you do, if you tap this, you can change your tuner. So instead of matching basically 3 to 1, it'll match 10 to 1, but you can only put 50 watts out. Does it actually change what the tuner can match? Of course it doesn't. All the lump components are fixed. What it does do is change how much reflected power the PA stage will tolerate. So by limiting the radio to 50 watts out, they know that they're not going to get as much reflected power, even when the SWR isn't optimal, and it can basically expand the radio's range, not the tuner's range, but the radio's range to 10 to 1 when you're limited to 50 watt. Once again, it is labeled kind of silly because it says tuner, not radio, but it's really changing the system. In fairness, it might also affect the tuner in terms of dissipation of the lumped components, but yeah, it's a bit silly to just say tuner. It's really changing the whole system. But yeah, it's a good feature to have. You know, if your antenna gets wet or whatever, and the 3 to 1 matching range isn't good enough, and there's a really rare station like, I don't know, North Korea, if it still exists. Then yeah, you can go and you've got that option of, you know, halving your power, losing 3 decibels, but at least being able to try for the contact. Conversely, if you are stuck and trying to call 911 and you've just got a little bit of wire hanging out the back of your radio and someone might phone patch you, that's what it's there for. Can't imagine a radio of this size being used out in the bush for an emergency. Just saying. But you know, the software is the same between all the Icom radios, as I previously mentioned. All right, that covers it. That took quite a long time, so I'm going to have a break. But thanks all for watching. I hope the menu overview was useful. And please comment on things if you know more than me. As I said, I don't profess to be an expert. The menu isn't very, the manual isn't very detailed, and some of the translations of the functions aren't perfect. So. I mean, the English is perfect, the grammar and that sort of thing, but they mightn't have named them what you thought would be obvious. So there you go. And as a last little treat for watching this exceedingly long video, I'm going to go and show you some strong signals.
You know, it's funny, she's my younger sister, so I'm the one that's supposed to lead the way, but I find her much more interesting than me to talk to at times. She, you know, has to talk in generalities, but by the same token, she would agree with you completely about the quiet ones. Yes, it's so good when people reach out for help, and I think that's one of the cool things about Lifeline is that you know, the training that she went through was a little more than I actually thought.
And there we go, that's what it sounds like. I will be doing better audio videos. I will be getting it straight out of the rig, not acoustically coupled to the microphone as such, which is a fancy way of saying I held the microphone near my external speaker. This is Jarrad VK3BL. Thanks for watching. This is the end of the video. Catch you all on the next one.